For centuries, Scandinavia was a quiet corner of Europe. Farmers worked narrow strips of land along fjords. Fishermen pulled cod from freezing waters. The rest of the continent barely noticed them. Then, on June 8, 793, a group of Norse raiders landed on the island of Lindisfarne, off the northeast coast of England. They burned the monastery, killed the monks, and carried off everything of value. Christian Europe was stunned. But here's the thing most people get wrong about that moment. Lindisfarne was not the beginning. It was the moment the rest of Europe finally noticed something that had been building for decades. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why that explosion of raiding happened, and how 5 separate forces came together to create the Viking Age. Most explanations pick one cause: overpopulation, ships, greed. But historians who study this period, people like Neil Price and others working with archaeological evidence across Scandinavia, keep running into the same problem. No single cause is enough. The Viking Age only makes sense when you stack 5 different pressures on top of each other and watch them interact. So, let's walk through each one. The first cause is land pressure, and it starts long before any raid. Between roughly 400 and 700 AD, iron tools slowly improved across Scandinavia. Better axes meant farmers could clear more forest. Better plows meant they could break heavier soil. Agricultural yields went up, and with more food, the population grew. That sounds like a good thing, and for a while, it was. But Scandinavia has a geography problem. Norway is about 80% mountains. Sweden is covered in dense forest across its interior. Denmark has flatter ground, but even there, the best farmland was limited. The population concentrated along coastlines and river valleys, exactly where the usable land was thinnest. By the 700s, families that had farmed the same plots for generations were running out of room to expand. You could not push further inland without hitting rock, ice, or forest too thick to clear with the tools available. More people, same amount of land. That tension alone did not cause the Viking Age, but it created a pool of people with strong reasons to look elsewhere. The second cause turned that general pressure into a personal one. It was the inheritance system. In much of early medieval Scandinavia, the eldest son inherited the family farm. That was the standard practice. If you were the second son, the third son, the fourth son, you got nothing. No land. No guaranteed livelihood. And in a society where owning land was directly tied to your standing, being landless meant being nobody. These younger sons had limited options. They could work as laborers on someone else's farm. They could try to clear marginal land at the edges of already settled valleys. Or they could leave. And leaving, for a coastal Scandinavian, meant getting on a boat. This created a steady supply of young men with no inheritance, no property, and a direct personal incentive to seek wealth somewhere else. Whether that meant trading, settling new territory, or raiding a foreign coastline, the motivation was the same. They needed to build a life from scratch, and the quickest path was overseas. This was not a sudden crisis. It was a slow, generational squeeze that pushed wave after wave of younger sons toward the sea. The third cause is political, and it explains why raiding was not just tolerated, but encouraged. Before Denmark, Norway, and Sweden became unified kingdoms, Scandinavia was a patchwork of competing chieftaincies. Local rulers called jarls controlled small territories and constantly jockeyed for power against each other. There was no central king to impose order, collect taxes, or direct military force. In this fragmented political world, a jarl's power depended on his ability to attract and reward followers. Gold, silver, weapons, and slaves were the currency of loyalty. A chieftain who could outfit a ship, lead a successful raid, and return with plunder gained followers, prestige, and leverage against rival jarls. Raiding was a career path. It was how ambitious men built the wealth and reputation they needed to compete in local politics. And here's the flip side of that same pressure. When a jarl lost a power struggle, when he was pushed out by a rival, his options were exile or submission. Many chose exile. They gathered whatever followers they had left, loaded their ships, and headed abroad to raid, trade, or carve out new territory. The political system did not just allow raiding. It actively produced raiders. Winners raided to get richer. Losers raided because they had nothing left to lose at home. The fourth cause is the one most people think of first, and it is genuinely impressive. The longship. Sometime during the 700s, Scandinavian shipbuilders perfected a design that changed everything. The clinker-built longship used overlapping planks, riveted together to form a hull that was both light and flexible. It could bend with ocean swells instead of fighting them. It carried a single square sail for open water crossings, but could also be rowed, giving crews precise control in rivers, harbors, and shallow coastal waters. The draft, the depth of the hull below the waterline, was remarkably shallow. A fully loaded longship could operate in water less than a meter deep. That meant these ships could sail up rivers that no other European vessel of the time could navigate, land directly on beaches without needing a port, and retreat before any organized defense could respond. Archaeological evidence suggests these ships could carry up to 80 warriors at a time. They were fast, capable of crossing the North Sea in a matter of days under good conditions. And they could go almost anywhere, up the Seine to Paris, up the Volga toward the Caspian Sea, across the open Atlantic to Iceland, and eventually to Newfoundland. Before this ship existed, Scandinavians had boats. They had been seafarers for thousands of years, but earlier vessels were smaller, heavier, and relied entirely on oars. They could handle coastal trips and short crossings, but not the kind of sustained, long-range voyages that raiding England or trading with the Byzantine Empire required. The longship was the missing piece of technology. Without it, all the population pressure, all the landless younger sons, all the ambitious jarls in the world could not have produced the Viking Age. They simply could not have gotten where they needed to go. The fifth cause shifts the focus away from Scandinavia entirely. It looks at the targets. In the late 700s, England was not one country. It was divided into multiple Anglo-Saxon kingdoms that spent as much time fighting each other as defending their borders. Ireland was similarly fragmented, split among dozens of competing local kings. Parts of the Frankish realm were dealing with their own internal power struggles, and scattered along the coastlines of all these regions were monasteries. Christian monasteries in this period were treasure houses. They held gold and silver liturgical objects, jeweled book covers, fine textiles, and stores of food. They were built on islands and coastal headlands, chosen for isolation and spiritual peace, not military defense. They had no walls worth mentioning. They had no armed garrisons, and they sat right on the water, exactly where a shallow draft longship could land. From the perspective of a Norse raiding crew, these monasteries were almost absurdly easy targets. High value, zero defense, perfect coastal access. The wealth concentrated in these undefended sites created an obvious opportunity that matched perfectly with the capabilities of the longship and the motivations of the men sailing it. Now, here is where the picture comes together, and where the common story about Lindisfarne gets complicated. Most textbooks point to 793 as the start of the Viking Age, but the evidence shows the pattern was already underway, well before that date. Around 750, at a site called Salme on the Estonian island of Saaremaa, archaeologists discovered two ship burials containing the remains of over 40 well-armed Norse warriors. These men had sailed across the Baltic Sea, fought, died, and been buried in their ships according to Scandinavian customs. That is organized, seaborne military activity, happening more than 40 years before Lindisfarne. It tells us that Norse crews were already crossing open water, already raiding or fighting abroad, already operating in the pattern we associate with the Viking Age. Then, in 787, 6 years before Lindisfarne, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records the first Viking raid on English soil at Portland in Dorset. A local official rode out to meet what he assumed were traitors. They killed him. These earlier incidents did not get the same attention as Lindisfarne, because Lindisfarne was a famous, symbolically charged target, and because literate monks wrote about it in horror and distributed those accounts across the Christian world. But the Salme burials and the Portland raid proved that the forces driving the Viking Age had already converged before 793. The population pressure was already there. The inheritance system was already pushing younger sons out. The political fragmentation was already rewarding raiders. The longship technology was already mature. and the vulnerable targets were already being hit. So what actually caused the Viking Age? The honest answer is that historians still debate the relative weight of each factor. Some researchers emphasize the demographic pressure, arguing that overpopulation on limited land was the primary engine. Others focus on the longship, pointing out that without the technology, none of the other pressures could have produced overseas expansion. Still others highlight the political fragmentation, arguing that the competitive chieftaincy system created a culture where raiding was a rational career choice rather than an act of desperation. Neil Price and other scholars working with recent archaeological evidence have noted that Viking Age societies were highly organized cultures, not the chaotic barbarian hordes that later Christian writers described. That organization, the ability to plan expeditions, coordinate crews, and sustain long-distance trade networks, suggests the causes were structural, not accidental. The mainstream consensus treats Lindisfarne as a convenient starting point, a symbolic marker rather than a true origin. But that consensus is being challenged by finds like the Salme ship burials, which push organized Norse seaborne activity back to around 750, decades earlier than the traditional date. This matters because it suggests the Viking Age was not triggered by any single event or sudden change. It was the result of long-term pressures that had been building for generations. What made the late 700s different from the centuries before was that all 5 causes were active at the same time. The population had grown beyond what the land could comfortably support. The inheritance system was producing a steady stream of landless, motivated young men. The political system rewarded those who could bring home wealth from abroad. The longship finally made long-distance raiding and trade physically possible. And the targets, fragmented kingdoms with undefended coastal wealth, were sitting right across the water. Remove any one of those 5 factors, and the Viking Age either does not happen or looks completely different. Without the population pressure, there are not enough people willing to leave. Without the inheritance system, there is less personal desperation. Without the political fragmentation, there is no reward structure for raiders. Without the longship, nobody can get there. Without the vulnerable targets, the risk is not worth taking. It was the convergence, all 5 pressures peaking in the same decades, that turned Scandinavia from a quiet, overlooked corner of Europe into the launching point for 3 centuries of raids, trade, settlement, and expansion that reshaped the continent from Dublin to Constantinople and from Newfoundland to the Mediterranean,